Well, welcome to the fifth and final week of our Bold Message series and kind of the big launching point of our Bold campaign that's going to run for the next few years. As you guys meet tonight and continue to talk about how God is calling you to be bolder, I just want to encourage you to have a conversation about what the long-term future looks like, not just the short term. So if for the past 5 weeks some big topic's been on your mind and you guys haven't talked about it, make sure and bring that up. Make sure and talk about, hey, should we as a group maybe go deeper on one of these topics that Chris has touched on? Should we discover and do some study on how to pray more boldly? What does it look like for us to give more boldly? Is that something that we need to talk more about or do a financial study to enable us to move that direction? What does it look like to invite more boldly? That really is where my group wants to go, is how do we invite more boldly? How do we get better at that? And then, of course, launching more boldly. What does it look like to get into ministry in a bigger way? Is that something you guys need to discuss? Is it something that needs to be a topic of discussion over the course of your time as a small group? This week, Chris has talked about the accumulation versus sacrifice, that there are no great memorable stories of people who accumulate things. The great stories of people who sacrifice things. Now, we're about a month away from Memorial Day. And that's going to be a time where we honor soldiers. Many of you have been in that position, soldiers who've given the ultimate sacrifice to defend our way of life, to defend freedom, and to defend the rights of the poor and the oppressed. That is a noble sacrifice that we honor and that we think of this time of year. And there are so many. Tonight we want to focus you on the sacrifice of Jesus and Jesus' followers. So I hope you'll read the passages Chris used in his sermon tonight out of the Sermon Discussion Guide or the Bible app, where in Romans it talks about Jesus' incredible sacrifice on our behalf. And then it talks about how that sacrifice propelled the disciples to be sacrificial, the followers of Jesus to be sacrificial in their lives as well. A cool thing about the sacrifice of the disciples, unintended consequence, I guess you could say, is if you read Acts chapter 2 chapters before the passage that we look at in the sermon, the disciples are actually having people sell property in the city of Jerusalem and give it to the disciples because they just don't need it. Believe it or not, that supposedly in the legends we have, that they sold so much property in the city that most of the believers, either by persecution or just by not having those expensive homes and land inside the city limits, ended up outside of the walls of Jerusalem. And if you know your Roman history, you know that roughly 40 years after Jesus was crucified, the Romans came in and destroyed that city completely and ran the Jews out and slaughtered hundreds, if not thousands, of people. And it may be that the Christian sacrifice in that city of Jerusalem is one of the things that shielded them and pushed them away from the coming persecution of the Jewish people. So there are all kinds of crazy consequences to sacrifice. The one that we're looking at this week really is the fact that sacrifice often creates a movement. That when Jesus died and sacrificed his life for us, he created not just a philosophy, not just a book, but a movement of people that has continued for 2,000 years and is bigger than any other religious movement in the world today. What does our sacrifice look like, and how can our sacrifice enable a movement to happen? You see, the Bold campaign for One Church is all about creating a movement. It's not about building one building. It's never been about creating 2 campuses. It's been about creating a movement of people that are here in Clarksville, but are also far beyond the borders of Clarksville. People who are creating churches because they've learned how to do church the way that reaches people who don't go to church. We want to envision, as you guys talk about sacrifice tonight, how your sacrifice might be a contributing factor in helping more children come to Christ through more children's environments, that may help more adults come to Christ because there's just more people out there reaching out to soldiers who may impact Clarksville, who may impact Fort Rucker or Fort Bragg or Fort Carson, or maybe just one of the cities in the U.S. or in the world that God happens to send you to. And maybe that will be through a local church that already exists. It may be through a church that we start because there's no church in that community like One Church. Or it may be just through you being a Christ follower and living out your faith in an authentic way. Pray about that sacrifice. Ask your group if you have lingering questions about what sacrifice looks like for you, and make a commitment together to pray for the courage that really enables us to be sacrificial. That's what the disciples needed and what they prayed for. And it's, I hope, what you guys pray for tonight as you walk through the last week of this formal bold discussion. I'm glad you guys have been with us, and I'll see you on Sunday.